My name is Ava Thompson. I'm 26 years old, and the night my father punched me in the face was the night he lost everything. He thought I was still the scared little girl who never fought back. He was wrong, because one phone call later, their perfect family image shattered forever. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White two-story home, blue shutters, manicured lawn, Sunday church smiles. My father, Richard Thompson, was a respected community figure, business owner, charity donor, man of integrity. That's what everyone called him, integrity. They didn't see what happened behind closed doors. They didn't hear the shouting. They didn't see my mother flinch every time his footsteps got too heavy. And they definitely didn't see him standing over me the night he decided I'd embarrassed him for the last time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it really started. I left home at 18, not because I wanted to, because I had to. Growing up, my father controlled everything: what I wore, who I talked to, where I went to college. He believed daughters were property, extensions of reputation. "You reflect me," he used to say. "Don't forget that." I didn't forget. I just stopped caring. At 16, I secretly applied for scholarships. At 17, I got accepted into a university 3 states away. I didn't tell him until the acceptance letter came. He tore it in half. I taped it back together, and I still left. That was the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, fear. Because control was slipping. For 8 years, I built my life from scratch. I worked 2 jobs, graduated with honors, built a career in compliance law, specifically corporate accountability. Funny how life works, right? The girl he tried to silence grew up studying how powerful men fall. But I never expected to use those skills on my own family. Until that night. It was my mother's birthday. She called me quietly 3 days before. "Your father wants you to come," she said. That wasn't what she meant. What she meant was, "He's watching me. Please come." So I did. I hadn't stepped inside that house in 3 years. The air felt the same. Heavy, performative. My father greeted guests with booming laughter. His arm wrapped around my mother's shoulders like a trophy. When he saw me, his smile tightened. "You decided to show up." "I was invited," I replied calmly. He leaned in closer than necessary. "Don't start anything." Start anything? I hadn't even taken my coat off. Dinner was tense but civil, until my father started drinking. That's when the mask always slipped. One of his business partners asked me what I did for work. "I specialize in regulatory compliance and internal investigations," I said. There was a pause. My father's jaw tightened. "Meaning she audits companies," he said dismissively. "Basically finds problems where there aren't any." I smiled politely. "Actually, I document problems that people try to hide." Silence. Guests shifted uncomfortably. He stared at me across the table. That look. The same one he used to give me before slamming doors. After dessert, he asked me to step into his office. I knew better. But I followed anyway. The door closed. The smile vanished. "You think you're better than me now?" he asked. "No." "You think you're smarter?" "I think I'm independent." That's when it happened. His hand moved so fast I didn't even register it until my cheek burned. The sound echoed. For a second, everything was quiet. I tasted blood. He stepped forward, fury vibrating in his voice. "You will not disrespect me in my own house." I bent slightly, instinctively shielding myself. And then he did something he'd never done before. He shoved me backward. I tripped. My hand hit the hardwood floor, and he stepped on it. Hard. The pain shot up my arm so sharply I saw white. "Remember who you are," he hissed. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize. I looked up at him, calm. And that scared him more than tears ever could. Because he realized something. I wasn't 16 anymore. He released my hand when there was a knock on the office door. My mother's voice trembled outside. "Richard, Is everything okay? He straightened his jacket. Perfect, he replied smoothly. He opened the door with a smile, and I walked past him without a word. But before I reached the hallway, I pulled out my phone, and I pressed one button. Call. See, what my father didn't know was that earlier that evening, when he'd started drinking and insulting me at dinner, I'd already turned on voice recording. The entire confrontation. Every word. The slap, his threats, everything. And the call I made? It wasn't to the police. Not yet. It was to someone far more devastating. Because while building my career, I discovered something interesting about my father's flawless business empire. Charity funds that didn't quite align. Invoices that duplicated. Contracts routed through shell vendors. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. But compliance law teaches you something powerful. Patterns don't lie. So months ago, I'd quietly begun documenting everything, just in case. And that night, after he stepped on my hand, just in case became necessary. The call connected. Daniel, I said calmly, it's time. Daniel Harper wasn't just my colleague. He was a federal investigator, and he owed me a favor. For the past 6 months, we'd been building a case. We were only missing one final piece. Intent. Threats. Proof of coercive behavior. Now we had it. Crystal clear. Back in the dining room, my father raised a glass. To family, he announced proudly. Guests clinked glasses. My mother forced a smile. And I stood near the staircase, ice pressed against my swelling cheek, watching him bask in applause. He had no idea. The investigation that would dismantle his empire had officially begun. Because one thing about men like my father, they don't fall from punches. They fall from paper trails. I left early. He didn't stop me. He thought he'd won. He thought fear would send me running again. Instead, I went straight to the hospital, documented the injury, filed the report, gave a statement, and handed over the recording. The nurse looked at me gently and asked, "Are you safe going home?" I smiled. I don't live there anymore. 3 days later, federal agents walked into my father's office during business hours. In front of employees, in front of clients, in front of the same partners who had toasted him at dinner. They carried warrants, laptops were seized, financial records confiscated, phones collected. The news spread fast. Community icon under investigation. Misuse of charitable funds. Tax fraud. Coercion allegations. My father called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. But revenge isn't about screaming. It's about timing. And this was just the beginning. Because what hurt him most wasn't the investigation. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't even the potential prison time. It was the realization that the daughter he tried to break was the one who broke his empire. And my mother? She called me that night. For the first time in my life, she didn't whisper. "What did you do?" she asked. "I told the truth," I replied. Silence. Then something I never expected. A soft exhale. Good. And that's when I realized the slap wasn't the moment everything was ruined. It was the moment everything finally changed. If you think that was the end, it wasn't. Because when powerful men fall, they don't go quietly. And my father still had one card left to play. But so did I. And mine was colder. 3 days after the raid, my father stopped calling. And that's when I knew he was thinking. Men like him don't panic loudly. They strategize quietly. And I had grown up watching him destroy people without ever raising his voice. So when the silence came, I prepared for war. The headlines were everywhere. Local business leader under federal investigation. Charity misconduct allegations surface. Financial irregularities in Thompson Enterprises. He released a public statement within 24 hours. "It's a misunderstanding. We are cooperating fully." Of course he was. Because men like my father never admit guilt. They deny. They deflect. They blame. And then, they retaliate. The first move came through my job. I was called into my supervisor's office on Monday morning. Not Daniel's office. Higher. The managing partner. She closed the door. Ava, we've received an anonymous complaint. I didn't react. What kind of complaint? She slid a printed email across the desk. Conflict of interest. Personal vendetta. Abuse of insider access. My father's language. I recognized the tone immediately. He was trying to paint me as a bitter daughter weaponizing her profession. Strategic, calculated, cruel, but sloppy. Because the complaint claimed I had illegally accessed internal documents. Except I hadn't. Every piece of information had come from public filings and whistleblower tips routed through proper channels. I'd been careful. Always careful. The managing partner studied me. Is there anything we should know? Yes, I said calmly. My father is attempting to intimidate me. Silence. Then she nodded once. We thought so. And just like that, his first move failed. That night, my mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. She looked smaller, not physically, emotionally. The house of glass was cracking, and she had lived inside it for 30 years. He's furious, she said quietly. I assumed. He thinks you orchestrated everything. I documented everything. She sat down slowly. He says you're trying to destroy this family. That word, family. The same word he used before every punishment. I knelt in front of her. No, I said gently. I'm trying to stop pretending. She looked at me like she wanted to believe it, but fear is a powerful cage. 2 days later, the retaliation escalated. A civil lawsuit, filed against me personally. Defamation, professional misconduct, emotional damages. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to drain me. Legal fees, stress, public doubt, classic intimidation. But here's the problem with suing someone who works in compliance law. We don't scare easily, and we keep records. Daniel called me that afternoon. He's desperate, he said. Good. But then his voice shifted. There's more. My father had begun moving assets, transferring funds offshore, closing accounts. He thought he was ahead of the freeze order. He thought he was smarter. But what he didn't know was that the warrant from 3 days ago? That was phase 1. Phase 2 was financial containment, and it had already been filed. Friday morning, federal freeze order activated, accounts locked, properties flagged, outgoing transfers blocked. He couldn't move a dollar. And that's when he showed up at my door. It was almost midnight, hard knocking, not frantic, furious. I opened the door. He looked different, not powerful, cornered. You did this, he said quietly. Yes. He stepped closer. You have no idea what you've started. I didn't move. No, I said. You started it, years ago. His jaw tightened. You think prison scares me? No, I replied. Losing control does. That hit. I saw it. For the first time in my life, he didn't look at me like a child. He looked at me like an opponent. You've destroyed your own blood, he said. I tilted my head slightly. You stepped on my hand. Silence. You raised me to understand power, I continued. You just forgot to teach me fear. His breathing changed. Not rage, realization. He turned to leave, but before he did, he said something that chilled me. You're not done paying. The next week, my mother disappeared. Her phone off, house locked. Neighbors said they saw her leave with suitcases. I called my father, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Panic crept in for the first time. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about leverage, and he had just taken mine. Daniel moved fast. We traced financial activity, flight logs, rental properties. Then we found it. A private property under a Shell LLC, 2 hours away. Isolated. Purchased 6 months ago. Preparation. He had been planning an exit strategy long before the raid, which meant he knew something was coming, which meant he had suspected me for longer than I realized. Authorities obtained a welfare check warrant. When they arrived, my mother answered the door, alive, unharmed, but controlled. My father claimed she needed space from media pressure. She later admitted he took her there to avoid influence. Influence, meaning me, meaning truth. That was the moment everything shifted legally. Coercive control, witness tampering, isolation attempt. The charges escalated, significantly. He was arrested 3 days later, not dramatically, not violently, calmly, handcuffed in front of his own employees. No speech, no denial, just cold fury in his eyes. And when they walked him past the glass office walls, no one clapped. No one defended him. They watched. Because once the illusion cracks, it shatters fast. The lawsuit against me? Withdrawn. Quietly. Public opinion? Turning. Former employees started contacting investigators. More records surfaced. More patterns confirmed. The empire wasn't just flawed, it was rotten. And rot spreads. But here's the part no one talks about in revenge stories. The part where victory doesn't feel loud, it feels heavy. Because when you dismantle your own father, you don't celebrate, you process. I sat in my apartment one night, staring at my healing hand, the bruise fading from my cheek, and I asked myself something honest. Was it worth it? And then I remembered being 16, standing in that same office, being told I was nothing without his name, and I realized this was never about revenge, it was about consequence, and consequences are cold. My mother filed for separation 2 weeks later. 32 years of silence ended with one signature. She called me after. I should have protected you. I swallowed hard. You can protect yourself now, she cried. But they weren't fear tears, they were release. You'd think that would be the end. Arrest, charges, public collapse. But powerful men always try one last move. And my father? He wasn't finished yet, because the trial was coming, and he was about to reveal something I never saw coming. Something that would test whether I truly understood power or if I had just inherited it. And when he made that final play, I realized something terrifying. I hadn't destroyed his life. I had exposed it. And exposure hurts more than prison ever could. The day he finally lost. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. My father sat at the defense table in a navy suit he used to wear to charity galas. The same posture, the same controlled expression. But there was something missing. Applause, control, belief. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. The charges were severe: financial fraud, misuse of charitable funds, tax evasion, witness intimidation, coercive control. The evidence wasn't emotional, it was documented. Bank transfers, shell companies, emails, recorded threats. Paper trails don't yell, they whisper truth, and truth echoes. I wasn't required to testify, but I chose to, because this was never just about money, it was about impact. The prosecutor asked gently, "Why are you here today, Miss Thompson?" I looked straight ahead. Because silence protects the wrong person. My father didn't look at me. He stared forward, rigid, unmoving, but I could see the muscle in his jaw flexing, control cracking. They played the recording, the one from his office. His voice filled the courtroom. "You will not disrespect me in my own house." Then the sound, the impact, the shift in his tone. "Remember who you are." There's something powerful about hearing abuse played back in a room full of strangers. It loses its intimidation, it becomes evidence. His defense attorney argued stress, misinterpretation, family conflict blown out of proportion. But facts don't blur. The financial analyst testified next.